When I first went to Jamaica, I didn't go out for a year, almost a year, and I didn't go out much, I should say. And the people that I was associating with, they were not to my liking. That would be Nari Williams Singh and Robin Rickey and their wives, etc. So some other people barely known, I'd barely known them really, um, but somehow reconnected with them and then went back into quote unquote hibernation. I stayed at my father's house. He wanted me to go out more. He said he felt that I shouldn't spend so much time at home. Not, of course, I was cleaning the house, rearranging it, and doing all kinds of things. Sometimes I went out with the maid uh, because of her size. He felt that she'd be a good bodyguard. Turns out she stole my iPhone and the case and the charger. Denied that she did it. Um, I know she stole it because the charger was also missing. It wasn't just the cell phone. So they tried to tell me that I may have left it somewhere. Well, I didn't really use it much because I didn't have service on it. I only used it to take pictures. So I knew I had my cell phone on me. She's the one who stole it. Eventually, she was fired. Um, there were things that went missing as far as my clothing, and she has a daughter who was in her 20s, and the daughter was slender and similar to my size. So, uh, yeah, when I would bring it up that certain things were missing from my clothing when she does the laundry, um, I suddenly would see them reappear. This is a heavy duty practice in Jamaica from the top down, because when my brother had broken into my room and stolen uh, and gained access to everything I ever owned, including clothing, and lamenting about how much clothes I had, um, which was ridiculous because I had accumulated clothes over time. So some clothes I wear in the home, some clothes I wear when I go out, some clothes I wear when I'm conducting business. I don't know how they expected me to dress, being the secretary of my father's company, transacting business on my father's behalf. And, I don't know. Everything I did was up for scrutiny and criticism. The Freemasons complained that I wore black a lot. If I want to wear black, that's my business. Number one. Number two, what business is of theirs? They're not buying my clothes. They don't, like my brother, the helper that he was with, she wanted my blow dryer, for example. I told her no, that I had a smaller second one that she could take, but not that one that I normally use. They took my shoes, they took my clothes, etc. They helped themselves once my brother broke into the room. Um, So he kept my laptop, he did whatever, and then he returned it. Yes. He returned my clothes and shoes minus the ones that were taken by the helper or whatever. So Kathy Lee Coley, yes, that helper or maid, whichever word is acceptable to whoever. So Charles Heholt, when I first started going out more on a regular basis, I would stop by a restaurant on the premises of a hotel. It was somewhat safe, in my opinion. I didn't really go anywhere where there wasn't security or some form of security. um, especially after I started driving the Mercedes. Now, the incident that led up to my driving the Mercedes was my father being robbed in January of 2019 by knife point, and he believed he was followed from the bank. Now, Chantel Pasley was the one who arranged that robbery, and her handbag was in the back of the Benz when my father had taken her for a doctor's appointment in Portmore. And on his way back to Kingston, he stopped to use the restroom at a restaurant and was followed into the bathroom where he was held at knife point, a knife to his throat, threatening his life. And he gave them everything he had on him, including the car keys. He begged them not to hurt him, just take everything and let him be. So they did. But Chantal Pasley later stated that her handbag was returned to her with her ID and everything, which I thought was suspicious. Anyhow, I, I I guess at some point, well, my father and I decided that I would he would take the SUV I was driving, and I would take the Mercedes. And big thing was his back as well. His climbing down into a car was more difficult for him, and his back pain versus climbing up into the SUV, Mitsubishi. Um, Anyhow, that all got distorted that I took away my father's car and I wouldn't give it back to him, and all kinds of petty foolishness that my father is not the type of person to behave in that manner, um, or even think on those things. So let's call that, other people, including my brother, saying all kinds of things, whispering all kinds of things into my father's ears. Anyhow, Charles Heholt initially began questioning me about my father's will. Um, Shortly after, it came to understand that he was the best friend of Avril's first boyfriend many, many years ago. So I never had a conversation with Charles Heholt any time before that, even when we were teenagers. So he may have come to the house once or twice when we lived off Red Hills Road with his best friend to visit Avril. I didn't know them. I wasn't around much to even have a conversation with them. Anyhow, he was extremely concerned about what was in my father's will, and he believed that that my father should divide his properties and his assets equally between all of us. At the end of the day, I don't know why Charles Heholt, the big Freemason and commissioner of betting, gaming, and lotteries, why he was so involved and concerned about my father's will. So, and not being so concerned about his own father's will. Yes, he did. When he got drunk, he did talk about all kinds of things, including his debt to one of the banks. So He would harass me about my father's will, believing that my father left everything to us. No, to excuse me, to me. Sorry, believing that my father left everything to me, and my father did, in a sense. Of my four siblings, he left everything to me, and in the will he had brought to me for me to look over and help him with changing. None of my siblings were really mentioned except for, the house would go to my mother, and my brother would get the land that the business was on, and um, my my sisters' names were not mentioned, Camille nor Avril. And that's his right. He had wanted dental care from my older sister for many, many years, and she never made the time to either see him, or, he grew fearful of flying because of the toll it took on his body, his ears, etc. And yes, he didn't want to do a long flight to go to Washington State from Jamaica for my sister to do his teeth. The most she could do was offer some recommended person in Jamaica, a dentist, to do his teeth. But she never took the time to come and look at his mouth or anything. It was grossly offended by her. And my younger sister, well, I had started this story in the prior video where she, during the time my mother was in the hospital prior to the surgery, um, my dad saw my sister, and so on. She cried, and he asked me to give her his phone number when we were driving to the airport for me to take him, for him to go back to Jamaica. So um, he waited until my mom was discharged from the hospital and she was home, and then he left. Anyhow, she um, never called him. She always had the expectation that he should call her. And she has this stance with people. I think she believes that because she's rich, people should stop talking to me, um, and exclusively speak to her. Otherwise, she's not going to engage in relationship or communication with anybody who was talking with me. So it's playing the role of a humongous hypocrite, um, and interfering in my marriage, interfering in my divorce case, interfering with my children. This is the extent to which she went, as far as trying to damage and destroy my life. And they chastised my father when they eventually started coming after I had exited the home. They would chastise him about choosing me over them. This is how base and pathetic they are. These are adult people, over 50 or over 45 years old. Anyway, um, yeah, she never called my dad. She always wanted him to call her. And, I understand that she has her boundaries, but other people have boundaries too. Her boundaries don't make greater etchings in the earth because she's also rich. Now, I want to make it clear this statement that there's nothing Avril has that I would ever want. There's nothing, including her family unit, her nuclear family, because I know Her marriage is probably one of the worst I've ever heard of, even as a therapist. Anyhow, um, I wouldn't want to live in a glass mansion with someone I absolutely can't stand and have the silence, and it's just a totally dysfunctional marriage. And they put the icing on the shit cake to make it all appear to be something people should admire and um, want. Not me. I'm not the type of person that is hypocritical in the sense of living with someone who I do not like, and it's mutual. Anyhow, um, they brought up a letter I had written to my grandmother many, many, many years ago when my grandmother found out about my mother's affair that was openly happening in front of her face when my father was absent. He had been in Jamaica, and when uh, my mother's man, quote unquote, would be coming in and out of the house, my grandmother became upset about that. And she made some very terse and uh, staunch and uh, provoking statements about it. And my mother was very distraught about it. And the letter was not pleasant. Um, it somewhat justified certain things, and I believe my brother took that letter, and he's the forgist in the family. As I said, he wanted to do everything my father did, like the way my father walked, the way my father brushed his teeth, the way my father gargled, the way his mannerisms. So he, over time, learned to replicate my father's signature, forge, with the ability to forge my father's signature, because his signature was the exact replica of my father's signature. Anyhow, he just wanted to be my father. And when he did come back to Jamaica in 2021, um, he was impersonating my father to people at the bank and calling himself Junior, as I mentioned that in a prior video. Um, so Charles Heholt, back to the story of Charles Heholt. Yes, so he kept harassing me about it, and I went to my father one day, because we talk about everything. I told him about it. He said, "Well, give Charles Heholt my number and have him call me, since he wants to discuss my assets and how they should be distributed when it has nothing to do with him or his father or what his father had." Now, this is a thing with these Freemasons and Eastern Stars. They, for example, when I left my father's home and I did run into anybody in the town I was in, the first thing they asked me is, "Where do you live? Where do you stay? Where are you?" I said to them, finally, what is that how you start a normal conversation? The first thing you do is ask somebody where they live or where they are. Do I know where you live? Do I want to know where you live? No. Please don't ask me where I live. Because this is how Freemasonry works. If they ask you a question and you answer it voluntarily, then you've gone into opening up yourself to all kinds of things they could do to you. But once you don't give them that permission, once you do not answer and you put a boundary there, they can't do 90% of whatever they intend on doing. You think those people didn't know where I lived or where I stayed? Yes, they did. They needed for me to say it to them when they asked me over and over, where do you live? It's none of your business. Pretty much that was my answer. Very intrusive people with all kinds of, you know, machinations of or machinations of um, oaths and voluntarily disclosing information and very odd and strange, ridiculous, awful people. Moving forward, Charles Heholt, I related the information my father gave me to give to him, and I gave him my father's number. He was so shocked and taken aback. But I do believe that eventually the Freemasons went to my dad and they started making demands of him and threatening his life and threatening my life to him under Charles Heholt. Because Charles Heholt, he was determined since he was connected with my brother and my younger sister. So I tested my theory, by the way. And how did I do this? Well, I am a therapist, so I understand psychology in a way most people don't. So I understand Freemasonry practices dark psychology. Well, by ethics, we're not allowed to do that. Anyhow, I would let Charles Heholt know in an inadvertent way that I know what he did. This is after I had moved out of my father's house, or I should say left, because I didn't get a chance to take my belongings when I left. Um, but I let him know I know he was involved, and I was not. Uh, I wasn't pleasant about it. Because how can you be pleasant about something like that? Someone deliberately interferes in your father's and your life and your company and all kinds of things, and I just let him know clearly, but not in a vulgar way, that I know what you did. And I did that a couple of times, and suddenly I get a call from Avril, my younger sister. So it was clear that Charles would reach out to Avril anytime I let him know I know what he did. And that was how I confirmed on a psychological level what was going on in reference to Avril and Charles and the Freemasonry connection. Now, Avril is married to the son of a Freemason Grandmaster in Montego Bay, and Avril's in laws. Now, my brother in law's brother, his wife, has a younger sister who Charles was once married to. And when I was in the circle of all these Freemasons and not really knowing that they were such a malefic group of gangsters and gang members, RICO criminals, um, they felt it was normal for them to be interrogating me on this level. Now, the Eastern Stars were also involved, such as one of my brothers when he was younger. His ex-girlfriend, Julia Vaz. And um, it was a whole big scheme with all kinds of timelines on it and plotting against my father and I. So shortly before I was disadvantaged in Jamaica through their plots and plans, Charles Heholt was very verbally aggressive, calling me stupid. You know, they're always trying to break your self concept when you're around them. And he was using profanity and all of that. He was drunk. So, you know, these people, people cannot, I just want to do a teaching moment. People cannot affect your self image or your self construct, your core self construction, when you do not respect them. That's right. If you sized up someone to be unworthy of respect, because respect is earned, it's not given. No title, no amount of education, and, um, you know, letters after your name. Because many people have, by the way, botched their way to getting a degree. They have, many people out there with degrees have false degrees because they did not work for it. They bought it, they stole it, they did whatever. They bought tests. They cheated to gain that degree, and that is why we have so many inept people with degrees out there. So, yes, not impressed with just any Joe Schmo. That's me. I am not impressed with any Joe Schmo who expects me to respect them because of their titles or whatever behind their name. Anyhow, he was, um, this is the later stages of their plan. He was going to the lodge for them to concoct all these plans against my dad and I so that my sister and brother would get my father's, and obtain falsely my father's assets and access to my father's belongings. You know, how awful is that? Which is part of my affidavit, that Charles Heholt felt he had the right to override my father in the distribution of his assets. And that's pretty much this message, um, which I will continue in the next video shortly. Thank you again.